Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. We'll start today inshallah on hadith number 124, Babul Istinja'i bil Hijara, the chapter about cleaning oneself after using the bathroom with rocks. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله تعالى عنه قال اتبعت النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وخرج لحاجته فكان لا يلتفت فدنوت منه فقال ابغني أحجارا فأستنفض بها أو نحوه ولا تأتيني بعظم ولا روث فأتيته بأحجار بطرف ثيابي فوضعتها إلى جنبه وأعرضت عنه فلما قضى أتبعه بهن. Okay, so here Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala an says that he was with the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam when the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam went to use the bathroom. And the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, when he used the bathroom, he wouldn't look left or right, he wouldn't be preoccupied with things. Not that it needs to be said. I think you know where I'm going with this. Telephones in the bathroom and stuff like that. It's a habit, I think, that probably most of humanity has picked up on. I've been in public bathrooms where people are on the phone while using the bathroom. Right? They're on the phone having a conversation with somebody while they're using the bathroom. Right?
Somebody divorcing somebody on the phone in the bathroom. I'm fighting for divorce. I'm failing. I didn't know. I just ran out of
So in another hadith, which I don't think is in Bukhari, the Prophet ﷺ says, let not two people talk to each other while they're using the bathroom because Allah despises that. So having conversations while using the bathroom is, I won't say it's not haram, because that hadith that I just referenced is questionable in terms of authenticity, but reasonable in terms of its meaning. It makes sense, right? It seems to fall in line with what Islam would say. So scholars held conversations while using the bathroom as something that is discouraged and something that should not be a habit. Every now and then you'll have a kid come and say mama or whatever, baba, this or that. Fine, we're talking about the conversations. So it should be avoided. Now, being on your phone is not a conversation per se. So I'm not going to say it's discouraged. I'm not even going to say it's makruh to be on your phone while using the bathroom. But here you have the Prophet ﷺ, he wouldn't even look right or left. He'd go, relieve himself, clean himself, and he's done. Right? Anyway, just to keep in the back of our minds. I know for some people, the only peace they find in their home is while in the bathroom, especially if they have a bunch of kids. Just kind of making some jokes here for in terms of our culture and whatnot. But that's how the Prophet was, alayhi salatu wasalam. So Abu Hurairah says that I came close to him, and he told me, Abu Hurairah, go find me some rocks so that I can clean myself using them. Back then, there was no toilet paper. Rocks, right? And so when a person would go out to use a bathroom, they would find some rocks with them, like while on their way, find some rocks, and they would use it because it would remove what remains after you relieving oneself. So the scholars discussed, when the Prophet said, find me some rocks, is he telling us that rocks is something that we need to use? Like the Sharia is commanding us that when we do number 2, that we clean ourselves with rocks. Or, based on the technologies available then, there were no specific technologies or products to use to relieve or to clean oneself, and so they would just use rocks. And rocks work because they were able to remove it. So is the purpose the removal, regardless of what removes, or does the Sharia want rocks? And the answer is obvious, as we know. Nobody's taking rocks in their bathroom. You'll find the water, whatever, urine, the bidet or the water urine, we find this, but Muslims don't have a practice of keeping like a bowl of rocks in the bathroom. So clearly, anything that removes the impurities, such as toilet paper, suffices. Right? But back then it was rocks. So the Prophet took some rocks and he told Abu Hurairah, find me some rocks, but don't bring me rawth, which is dung, animal dung, or azm, bones. So again, you're out in nature, and this is a natural world. So clearly animals would relieve themselves, and there's some behind, and it dries up, right? So it becomes a little bit hard, ossified, a little bit rocky. Bones are solid, right? So the Prophet ﷺ says, don't bring these things. Why? Because they're impure, right? So obviously dung is it's like you're fighting fire with fire, so to speak. It doesn't work. You're trying to remove impurities with the same substance. Right? It doesn't make sense. Plus, it smells. Even for the scholars which I follow, even for the scholars say that the dung of animals that is halal to eat is not impure in of itself. There's still a stench, right? So part of cleaning oneself is cleaning the scent. So it doesn't make sense to use dung. As for bones, the bones of a dead animal is impure. Even if it's halal to eat, if slaughtered, if it dies and becomes a carcass, it's impure. Right? So if a sheep just dies of natural causes, that carcass is impure. So you can't clean an impurity with an impurity. In another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ says that this is the food of jinn. The jinn eat this stuff, right? Okay, so let's just imagine here for a second. You see a pile of bones, right? You're sitting there and you're like, you know what? I'm going to see if the jinn actually eat this. I don't think you'll be sitting there and all of a sudden the bones just start disappearing, right? Maybe that's what happens. They physically take this and they eat it. But perhaps, and this is just a big perhaps what it means for jinn to eat, because the Prophet ﷺ says that if you don't say Bismillah when you eat, the jinn eat with you. But once again, there have been many times where we forget to say Bismillah, and we're not trying to take food to our mouths and all of a sudden it disappears. So what does it mean that the jinn eat from what we are able to physically interact with? Perhaps, again, a big perhaps the way jinn eat is by taking the nutrients of that thing without the actual physical thing. Like, it doesn't reduce from what you see, but actually it removes the nutrients. Because the jinn are a source of energy, right? They're not a solid like us. We can't go through this wall. We're a solid. The jinn can go through the wall because they're a source of energy. And they're able to use their energy to manipulate and seemingly reconstruct the molecular structure of a solid so that they can actually take that through solids. So the jinn said, I'll go get the throne of the queen. The scholars asked, how on earth would he be able to take it out? Right? So, I mean, it just would seem very bizarre if all of a sudden the throne just picked up and you have this solid flying in the air and all the guards are looking at it and the queen doesn't know about this, right? So it just begs the question, are they able to take a solid, molecularly reconstruct it, right, to where it's able to go through other solids and even becomes maybe slightly invisible to human detection? Again, a big perhaps, right? I'm not saying this is what Islam says. I'm saying it's something to consider in light of modern physics. Right? So perhaps what's meant by the jinn eating, from what we have, if we don't say Bismillah, or eating from these things, is that they take the nutrients. And if this is correct, or if there's some merit in what I say, then it can help us understand why we eat sometimes and we just don't feel like we ate. It's like there's no barakah in the food. You eat, but you don't feel energy. Right? Everybody's noticing this. And the answer tends to be, it's just the quality of the food. It's not organic. It's because it's GMOs and it's modified and the fruits are sprayed with stuff. That definitely could be the case. But perhaps also, by not saying Bismillah, the jinn are eating all this, all the nutrients. And all we're eating is something that is void of nutrients. Right? We might feel full, but we don't feel energy. Allahu A'lam. Again, this is all for contemplation. Anyway, so Abu Hurairah brings for him some rocks, and the Prophet ﷺ used it to clean himself. Now, while using rocks itself is not an obligation, there are alternatives. Cleaning oneself after using the bathroom is an obligation. A Muslim must clean themselves after using the bathroom, whether number 1 or 2, even if they don't plan on making salah, even if they don't plan on doing wudu, right? It is an obligation in of itself. And the Prophet ﷺ mentions, and I believe the hadith will probably come somewhere down the line, that the Prophet passed by a grave, and one of those graves the person was being punished because they wouldn't properly clean themselves after using the bathroom. Okay. So it's serious.
What was that hadith?
لا يستنزه من البول. Right. باب لا يستنجى بروث. The chapter about not using dung to clean oneself. عن ابن مسعود رضي الله تعالى عنه قال أتى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم الغائط فأمرني أن آتيه ب3 أحجار فوجدت حجرين والتمست الثالث فلم أجده فأخذت روثة فأتيته بها فأخذ الحجرين وألقى الروثة وقال هذا ركس. So Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala an said that the Prophet ﷺ went to use the bathroom. He told me to get 3 rocks for him. 3, why? This is intentional. So the Prophet ﷺ says, وَمَنِ اسْتَجْمَرَ فَلْيُوتِرْ. The Prophet says, if you clean yourself, then do it in an odd number of times. And in another hadith, he says 3. So what's meant by that? Well, what's meant by that, practically, is to make sure that nothing remains. There is no residue after wiping oneself. So by fiqhi obligation, you are required to continue to clean that part until nothing comes back, right? Until when you actually wipe, you don't see any color. That is an obligation. So 3 tends to do the job. If you have a bidet, right, it tends to take care of it, and maybe 1 is enough. But the idea is you must continue to clean that area until there's nothing left. Okay? And if you could do 3, then that's good. But what's meant by 3? 3 separate rocks? Well, it seems like that's what's meant here, because actually clearly that's what's meant here, because Abdullah says that he found 2 rocks, he couldn't find a 3rd one. Right? However, is the goal 3 wipes or just going above and beyond in terms of how many times you clean? This is where scholars debated. Right? But aside from the debate, we say that it must be clean. It must be fully cleaned. So Abdullah says that I found 2 rocks. I tried finding a 3rd one. I didn't find a 3rd one. So I found a piece of dung, and he took it to the Prophet ﷺ. So the Prophet took the 2 rocks and he threw the dung, right? And the fact that he didn't tell him, go find me a 3rd rock, tells us that the 3 is a sunnah. It's not an obligation, right? The obligation, once again, is making sure the area is clean. If it needs more than 3, then you have to go more than 3. If it takes 4, great, you have to do 4, but go to 5 just to do the witr. And he tells Abu Hurairah that the reason why this doesn't work is because it's riks or rijis. It's impure or disgusting. One of the 2. So either the scholars say it's impure and you can't use an impurity to clean an impurity, it doesn't make any sense, or it's just gross because of the stench and the bacteria and whatnot. The whole point is to clean yourself, not to dirty yourself. And while many scholars hold that dung might be pure in of itself, it still doesn't have any bacteria on it, and the stench and what I just mentioned. Bab al-wudu marratan marratan. The chapter about doing wudu one time, meaning cleaning each body part one time. عن ابن عباس رضي الله تعالى عنهما قال توضأ النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم مرة مرة. So here Ibn Abbas says that he saw the Prophet making wudu, cleaning, wiping or washing each part one time. So hand once, mouth and nose once, face once, arms each once, head once, ears once obviously, and then the feet once. And then in the next hadith, Bab al-wudu marratain marratain, the Prophet did each one, he washed each one twice. Not once, but twice. عن عبد الله بن زيد الأنصاري رضي الله تعالى عنه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم توضأ مرتين مرتين. Same thing, right? Instead of once, he did twice. So wash hands twice, mouth and nose twice, face twice, each arm twice, right? The sunnah is 3, which is the next chapter, Bab al-wudu thalathan thalathan, right? To do it 3 times. Right? But less than that, as we discussed I think last time, is acceptable as well. Your wudu is valid, but it wasn't perfected, right? You didn't get the maximum reward. Yeah, so what's the minimum? So the Quran talks about wudu, chapter 5, verse 6, I believe, and he mentions if you're gonna do salah, then wash your faces and your arms, including the elbows, wipe your head, and wash your feet up and including the ankles. These are the 4 obligatory parts of the body that need to be washed or wiped when making wudu. You add to that intention, because it's an act of worship, but if you follow Hanafi, intention is not part of it. Okay, intention and then order. It needs to be done in the order the Quran came, and the order is known to us. And number 3, it needs to be done consecutively, meaning one after the other. You can't do one and then go and do things and come back. And so these are the obligatory, bare minimum. Anything that wasn't mentioned here is a sunnah. All right, you're welcome. Bab al-wudu thalathan thalathan. Making wudu, washing each part 3 times. عن عثمان بن عفان رضي الله تعالى عنه أنه دعا بإناء فأفرغ على يديه 3 مرات فغسلهما ثم أدخل يمينه في الإناء فمضمض واستنشق واستنثر ثم غسل وجهه 3 مرات. So here Uthman رضي الله تعالى عنه basically is teaching the people around him that how he saw the Prophet ﷺ perform wudu. And what the Prophet does here is the perfect form of wudu. Right? This is how he would almost always make wudu, except in rare occasions, like in the previous 2 hadith. So this is the wudu we want to be doing. And this is the wudu that any Muslim who prays is doing already. Right? So there's not going to be any new information here, but for the sake of just going over it, we'll go ahead and do that. So the Prophet ﷺ, Uthman radiallahu ta'ala called for a bucket of water, and he put water on his hands, and he washed his hands 3 times, right? He washed his hand 3 times. And then he put his right hand in the bucket, took a scoop of water, and he put it in his mouth, and he swished it, and put it in his nose, and he blew it out at the same time. I see some people do mouth first, and then nose. That's fine. But it seems like the way the Prophet ﷺ would do it is simultaneously. He put the same scoop in his mouth and his nose, right? And he would swish it around in his mouth, and he would blow it out of his nose. ثم غسل وجهه 3 مرات, and then he would wash his face 3 times. The face is from the normal what would normally be a hairline. So for guys who are bald or they have a receding hairline, it's not whatever is visible, it is where you normally have hair. So you follow the hairline and you include this area between, right to the earlobes, not the earlobes, whatever this is called, right? This area, this is part of the face, and then all the way, including the chin, just under the chin, right? For men with beards, some scholars say you just kind of wipe the beard, but what's necessary is if there's, just kind of put your fingers through the beard area, all right? That's the face. He would do it 3 times. وَيَدَيْهِ ثَلَاثًا إِلَى الْمِرْفَقَيْنِ, and he would wash his arms, each arm, 3 times, including the elbow, right? So from the wrist all the way, including the elbow. 3 times the right, then 3 times the left. ثُمَّ مَسَحَ بِرَأْسِهِ, and then he would wipe his head, right? And not in this hadith, but in another hadith, he would start from the beginning, go all the way to the back, and then come back forward, like that, right? Like this, and then back. One time, right? ثم غسل رجليه 3 مرات إلى الكعبين, and then he would wipe his feet, wash his feet 3 times, including the ankle, right? So it'd be just above the ankle. Now in another hadith, كان يتخلل, right? He would go between his fingers and his toes. ثم قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من توضأ نحو وضوء هذا ثم صلى ركعتين لا يحدث فيهما نفسه غفر له ما تقدم من ذنبه. And then after making this wudu, the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام says, whoever does wudu the way they saw me making wudu, and then prays 2 rak'ahs, nafil, and in those 2 rak'ahs they have a decent amount of khushu', right? They're not talking to themselves. He says, if you do that, then your previous minor sins are forgiven. Your previous minor sins are forgiven. So, big stuff. This is why I say wudu is the most underestimated act of worship. I'm sorry?
After take wudu and then salat 2 rakaat, and the niyyah is
Sunnat al-wudu? Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, so.
Can we combine with the sunnah, like for example, you went to masjid and then the sunnah wudu and
Tahiyyat masjid?
yes.
Can you combine sunnat wudu with tahiyyat masjid? Yes.
Oh.
All right. I'm going to skip hadith 129 because it's pretty much the same as the previous one. So 130. Bab al-istinthar fi al-wudu. Chapter about istinthar. Istinthar is putting water in your nose and blowing it out. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله تعالى عنه أنه قال من توضأ فليستنثر ومن استجمر فليوتر. Whoever does wudu, then let them put water in their nose, and if they wipe themselves after using the bathroom, then do it an odd number of times. So, like, I don't know how it is in the women's side, but in the guys' side, sometimes you find these guys who, when they put water in their nose, I mean, they're into it. It's like,
Yeah,
and then,
it's kind of hard to go.
right? I mean, they go a lot. And I believe there is a hadith that says, like it encourages really getting to that level, right? So I'm not going to say what they're doing is wrong. However, if you're like me, if water gets too high, it's painful. I don't know what it is, sinuses, exposed sinus, I don't know what it is. I don't know how they do it, because for me it's painful. If you're like me, then please don't put yourself through pain. Inshallah, what you're able to do suffices for the sunnah. Bab al-istijmaru witran. The chapter about cleaning oneself an odd number of times. وعنه رضي الله تعالى عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال إذا توضأ أحدكم فليجعل في أنفه ماء ثم لينثر وإن استجمر فليوتر وإذا استيقظ أحدكم من نومه فليغسل يده قبل أن يدخلها في وضوئه فإن أحدكم لا يدري أين باتت يده. Okay, so here the Prophet ﷺ mentions two things that we've already discussed. Putting water in your nose, and if you wipe yourself an odd number of times. And if you wake up from sleeping, then don't put your hands in a vessel of water before cleaning your hands. Okay? So there's a few questions here. Well, why? And how? And what about today? All right? So back then, there weren't any water fountains, obviously. There's no faucets, there's no running water. What you have is, you go to the well, get a bunch of buckets, and you just store it at your home, right? Until this day, you have people living in remote areas that they would spend literally a day just to go fetch water. Like an entire day is spent going to a well and coming back, right? So that water is precious. Now imagine if like a rat goes in that water and dies in it. That's pretty bad. That would suck. I mean, oh my God, I lost an entire day's work. Now I had to go there again. So they had vessels. That means if it gets dirty, it's gone. So the Prophet says, فَإِنَّ أَحَدَكُمْ لَا يَدْرِي أَيْنَ بَاتَتْ يَدَهُ. You don't know where your hand was while sleeping. Okay, now we're thinking, where's my hand gonna go while I'm sleeping? I have these fresh, sheets. I have all these scents around me. I'm like, well, what's the big deal? Well, the Prophet ﷺ is saying, you don't know if your hand has made contact with impurities. Okay, what impurities? Well, back then, you don't have these doors that prevent mice and stuff like that. And back then, how would they go to sleep? What would they be wearing when they go to sleep? They didn't have pajamas back then. They probably weren't wearing anything, right? They only had one garment. That was life back then. And so instead of getting it dirty while sleeping, they would just sleep without clothing, and then they would just have sheets over them, right? They give time for the clothing to dry from all the sweat, to get a little bit of fresh air, get some of the stench out of it. So that's how they would be. So a person doesn't know where their hand was. Now, okay, makes a little bit more sense. Right? And so the Prophet is saying, before putting your hand in the wudu, in the water, take the water, pour it on your hand, and clean it 3 times. That's what's going on. This way, any impurities, potential impurities, are off, and when they put their hand in the water, now the water remains pure and they can use it multiple times. So, does that apply to us today? If we take it purely based on the reasoning the Prophet gave us, well, we know that our hands aren't going to be in any impurities. We're wearing pajamas. Mice aren't going to be wandering around our houses. Your sheets are clean, right? You're fine. Number 2, our water isn't still. We have faucets, right? So even if my hands are full of impurities and I put my hand in the faucet, it's running water. It's not going to make it impure, right? So unless you're out camping or something like that and you only have this still water, even today, they have faucets in campsites. This is more of a formality. Right? So yes, you still wash your hand 3 times as part of wudu. That is part of wudu. But the reasoning, at least that's being presented here, is suspended, so to speak, because it simply does not fit our lifestyles. The next hadith, عن عبد الله بن عمر رضي الله تعالى عنهما قال وقد قيل له رأيتك لا تمس من الأركان إلا اليمانيين ورأيتك تلبس النعال السبتية ورأيتك تصبغ بالصفرة ورأيتك إذا كنت بمكة أهل الناس إذا رأوا الهلال ولم تهل أنت حتى كان يوم التروية. فقال أما الأركان. Okay, so here Ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala an is being asked a series of questions. When is he being asked this? After the death of the Prophet, probably a long time. So this is probably Ibn Umar, an elderly man, right? And people, he's a senior scholar of the Ummah, a senior scholar of the Ummah. And so naturally people will be observing him, trying to take their fiqh and their understanding of the religion from him, whether either through lectures, or so to speak, or just by observing his behaviors. And so they come to him, they say, we noticed several things in terms of what you do that goes against, or it's contrary to what most people are doing. So people are doing things a certain way and you're doing these things a different way. So they ask him about it. So the first question is, or the first observation is, we notice that you only touch the two corners of the Kaaba that face Yemen. Okay, so what does that mean? The Kaaba is, as you know, a cube, and there are four corners, right? The way they would identify those corners back in the day was based on the direction that they would face, right? So there is the corner of Asham that faces the Sham, two corners that face Yemen, right? So they said the two corners that face Yemen, the directions are towards Yemen, those are the only two ones you touch. What are those two corners? The black stone and the one before it. When you do tawaf, before you get to the black stone, there's that uncovered rock area, right? What do they call it? Rukn al-Yamani. The pillar that is facing Yemen, so to speak, right? And that is a sunnah to go and wipe it, as Ibn Umar is doing. So that's the first observation. So Ibn Umar says, أما الأركان فإني لم أرى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يمس إلا اليمانيين. He said, I touched these two because that's the only two that I saw the Prophet ﷺ touching, right? So what you see in Umrah or in Hajj and people touching like literally every single part of the Kaaba, if people are excited, it's the Kaaba, right? They love the Kaaba, they go and they touch it, whatever. But when it comes to the actual practice of the Prophet ﷺ, it's those two. In our times today, don't even bother yourself. Honestly, it's so crowded these days. But I remember back when I first started going to Umrah back in the early 2000s, when it wasn't this crowded, you can easily go and touch the Rukn Yamani. You could touch that one. But unless you're some big, strong, tall person, I honestly wouldn't advise. I didn't even try. Right? But anyway, so he says, I saw the Prophet touching these two. They didn't touch anything else. As for the people, they go and they start touching the maqam of Ibrahim. And they just touch the Hijr Ismail. They're just touching everything. Right? No, the sunnah is these two. If you can touch them, great. If you can't, don't worry about it. The second observation they had is that he wears a certain type of slipper. A sibtiyya, I don't really know what that is. It's going to be la sha'ra fiha. I don't know what that means.
It's pure leather. It does not have the wool in it.
Okay, so it's made of, I guess it's a material. So when you have this a sibtiyya, for example, it tends to be a certain place. Right? This is the type of clothing they wear in a certain place. So the Prophet ﷺ would wear a qamis that is from Rome, a qamis that's from Yemen, a qamis that's from a different place. And they would know that this is from a certain area based on just the style or the material. And so here, basically it is a slipper that is made fully of leather, and therefore it probably didn't have any straps. So you can imagine a slipper has a bottom, and then in the foot area or the toe area, it's probably fully covered. And that's how it's able to support you. You're able to keep it on. Right, so they said, we noticed you wear this type of slipper. And so Ibn Umar's response is, وَأَمَّا النِّعَالِ السِّبْتِيَّةِ فَإِنِّي رَأَيْتُ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم يَلْبَسُ النَّعْلَ التي ليس فيها شعر ويتوضأ فيها فأنا أحب أن ألبسها. So Ibn Umar said, I would see the Prophet wearing this type of slipper, and he would make wudu in it, So it's convenient for me, and I like to wear what I saw the Prophet ﷺ wearing. So he's saying there's nothing religious about what I'm wearing. Now, I'm not wearing this because we were commanded to wear this or that it's a sunnah to wear it, but rather I saw the Prophet wearing this, and I love wearing what the Prophet would wear. Right? Now, when it comes to the clothing of the Prophet, what is the sunnah when it comes to clothing? Right? Is what I'm wearing right now a thawb, a sunnah? Right? Meaning, I'm actually encouraged to go out in Spectrum Mall and just walk around in this. I've seen guys. I saw a guy in Nordstrom wearing a thawb and a hat, mashallah. What's that?
It's very chic.
Very chic.
Yeah.
Is this sunnah? A lot of people get it wrong. It's not. The Prophet wore whatever was available. He wore Roman, he wore Yemeni, he wore whatever. From different tribes. He wore whatever was available. What is an obligation is to cover the awrah. That's an obligation. How, the style, the material, it's almost entirely open, right? So no, this isn't a sunnah. This is Middle Eastern. It's not prophetic. This is how Arabs dress. Why did they dress this? They were dressing like this before the Prophet ever came on the scene. Abu Jahl used to wear this. Not literally this, but he used to wear this style of clothing, and the Prophet used to wear this style of clothing. There's nothing sunnah about it. Rather, Ibn Qayyim rahmatullah alayhi says, the sunnah in terms of what kind of clothing you wear is to wear the clothing that is culturally relevant to the place you're living. So it's more of a sunnah for me to walk around in a t-shirt and pants in America than it is for me to walk around in this. Right? That's more of a sunnah. Now for ladies who have conditions when it comes to hijab, right? Obviously there's more that needs to be covered that goes out of line with American culture. But where it comes in is in terms of what kind of clothing you use. And when you look at Muslimas around the world who observe hijab, you'll find that their hijab style differs. Right? In the Gulf, women wear just pure black. Or black abaya and just all black. Whereas in Indonesia and Malaysia, what's their style of hijab? A long shirt and loose pants, which is very similar to Turkey. All right? In South Asia, let's say in Pakistan, they have, I don't know what the top part is called. What is that? What women wear, the top part, and then it's right, and then the loose pants, right? They're all observing hijab. So the American hijab simply means that they cover all the parts that need to be covered in a proper way, meaning it's loose and whatnot. But the colors that they use, is it a long shirt and a loose pants, or something that seems more in line with American, culture? That's what we're talking about, right? What is it? Yeah, you're following sunnah. Again, just to be clear here, there are certain guidelines that the Sharia does maintain. It needs to be loose. So that's the sunnah aspect. When it comes to Islamic history, how were Muslims dressing throughout the ages? What did they prefer? And there are some distinct differences between Muslim culture and, let's say, Western culture. Muslims liked more clothing, and that was looser. Men and women, by the way. Right? Men and women. They preferred loose clothing. They found loose clothing to be more dignifying and noble. Right? And they found more clothing to be more dignifying and noble. And so, aside from the obligations when it comes to clothing, Muslims found the exposure of the body to be undignifying to the human being. In the West, it's the exact opposite. The more you reveal, the freer you are.
But
right?
this is not really recent.
I'm saying today.
Oh, yeah.
I'm saying how the West is today versus how Muslims are. That's one thing. And then number two, like for example, if you look at the traditional Muslim man's clothing, it's like a thobe that I'm wearing, and then they'd cover their heads with a turban, and that turban would come down, covering their necks and the sides of their faces. So a man who was really chic back in the day, the only thing that was visible from his body were his hands, his face, and his neck. They found that to be dignifying, right? So for all the ladies, Muslim ladies, who feel an amount of discomfort that men have more flexibility in terms of their dress choices in America, and now want to come and say, well, if men can do this, we should be able to do it as well. I tell them, flip the equation. No, wearing more clothing is better. So you wear more clothing, and you should be encouraging men to wear more clothing. That's how it is. I mean, like, I can go on and on about this. I could go on a big rant. Like these women who now say, I don't want to shave my legs, and I'm not going to shave my armpits, because men don't shave their legs and don't shave their armpits. Right? No, it's the opposite. You're doing the right thing. You should tell men to shave their armpits. Because it's gross. And all the sweat and the bacteria and the smell. It's ugly. As the Prophet ﷺ teaches us, a man should not go, or a woman should not go more than 40 days without shaving their armpits. That's hygienic. That's better. Right? So I encourage the ladies and say, if you're wearing more, that's good. Encourage men to wear more. Not the opposite. If men are wearing less, that means we could wear less. Anyway, where was I? Okay. And then the third observation they had is Ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu would dye his hair a yellowish color. Right? A yellowish color. You know how you find this in South Asian cultures and Central Asian, right? Like an orange, a type of blondish, right? An orange, yellow. It's kind of like that light blondish that's between blonde and orange.
Was it dark or like?
I don't know. So they said, we see you dyeing your hair this way, this color. So what's the deal? He says, وَأَمَّا الصُّفْرَةُ فَإِنِّي رَأَيْتُ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمْ يَصْبُغُ بِهَا. He said, as for the color, I saw the Prophet dyeing with this color. All right. So, is dyeing one's hair haram for male or female? No. All right. Is there a certain color that is haram? The answer is no. Except for men dyeing their hair black.
But women okay?
It seems like it. Right? For a man to dye his hair black. However, we run into a question. Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali dyed their hair black. But the Prophet said, verbatim, he said, right, when the father of Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhuma became a Muslim, he was a very old man, completely white hair. And the Prophet said, dye his hair, but don't dye it black. So how is it that Abu Bakr, who heard this, dyeing his hair black? We'll get to that inshallah after that. Where were we?
When did they dye their hair? They were so young. The Sahaba, like.
No, dyeing the hair when their hair starts getting gray.
But Abu Bakr and.
No, at that time Abu Bakr is in he's close to, yeah, he's probably 60 at that time, Abu Bakr. They weren't young.
Hair trends were turning. They started turning.
Yeah, if my hair's starting to turn. So how do we reconcile between this? And the answer is, if a man is very old, right, let's say 70 plus, they shouldn't dye their hair black. Why? Because it makes them look like they're 40. Right? Okay, well, isn't that nice for the man? Yeah, it's nice for him, but he can start playing games now. He goes to a lady who's 30 and says, oh, I'm 40. When he's 70. Stuff happens, right? And women are guilty too. But with makeup. You've all heard the stories, right? Of a lady who just decks herself out with makeup, and they get married, and then the next morning when she takes off her makeup, she's a completely different person, right? So it's to prevent deception, right? But anyway, the Sahaba would dye their hair different colors, and if they got really old, they would do either a reddish or a blondish color, yellowish. And then the next one is, what is it? Yeah. ورأيتك إذا كنت بمكة أهل الناس إذا رأوا الهلال ولم تهل أنت حتى كان يوم التروية. So he's saying that they ask, and we see that people will begin to do they would enter into the state of Hajj when they see the crescent of Dhul Hijjah. Right? They'll enter the ihram, they'll start saying labbaik Allahumma labbaik, etc. Whereas Ibn Umar would only do that on the day of Tarwiyah, meaning when they start preparing to actually go to Arafah. Right? And he says that's how I saw the Prophet ﷺ doing it. He would enter into the state of Hajj, and he would start saying labbaik Allahumma labbaik when he gets on his mount to go to Arafah. Right? Well, didn't they have to make ihram on their way from Medina? The answer was yes, they did that, but they did Umrah, and then they took off their ihram, and then they went back into the state of ihram when they started their Hajj. So he's simply explaining what the Prophet ﷺ used to do. Now, how this is related to the chapter, I don't know, but Wallahu ta'ala alam. We'll stop here at hadith number 133. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.